Speaker is General James Conway. General Conway is a retired United States Marine Corps four-star general who was the 34th Commandant of the Marine Corps. He is a 36-year veteran of the Corps. Among his previous postings were Director of Operations on the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Commanding General of the 1st Marine Division and Marine Expeditionary Force, taking part in the 2003 invasion of Iraq and the First Battle of Fallujah. It would take far more time than we have this afternoon to recount the list of his personal decorations, but I direct you to look in your program to see the remarkable service he has rendered our country. Please join me in welcoming General James Conway.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the warm welcome. Like others on the panel, this is my first opportunity to be with you, and I must say, as I've researched your organization and tried to do my homework in preparation for being here, I salute you for who you are, for what you represent, and for what you intend to do, given time and resources. Realizing that the depth and the capacity of the panel, I tried to look at what I could offer to you that might be different from what has been said or will be said this morning. And as one of two, I suppose, career military members, I thought I would try to stay on an area of focus that had to do with strategic interest. But I'm afraid I have to admit up front that I bring to you a somewhat somber message this morning. And that is that I have tremendous concern as we sit or stand here this morning that two nations, the United States of America and Iran, are on a collision course. And if something doesn't happen pretty soon, I see, unfortunately, that those two nations are going to be at each other's throats. And so I have a sense of urgency in terms of what you do and what you represent, and a sincere hope that the third option is an option that could perhaps play and make a difference in where I see us headed today. The U.S. strategic objectives, I think, can pretty much go without any emphasis in front of this group. Our purpose in the Middle East is to, first and foremost, of course, protect our citizens who are abroad. We also want to ensure that the sea lines of communication remain open, that there's free trade, to include, of course, oil that comes from the region with our allies. We want to partner with our friends and allies in the region, and perhaps uniquely to our involvement in the Middle East, where we see the potential for ungoverned spaces and for people that would plot attacks against our nation or those of our allies, we feel a need to take action, and you see this happening in the region today. From my perspective, the strategic objectives of Iran today are first and foremost to sustain the regime. I think somewhere in all of that is protection of its peoples, control to some greater or lesser degree of the Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz. I think that the country intends to extend its influence to the degree that it can in the region and in the other nations. And I think leverage against all of those things is now the development of a nuclear capability. And that, to me, is most troubling. Where those strategic objectives overlap, I think there is potential for confrontation, perhaps even conflict. And I'd like to talk to you about two or three of those areas today where those possible confrontations could occur. First of all is simple miscalculation on the part of either nation, not understanding the impact of what certain actions could mean. There's ample precedence in the region for miscalculation. The hostages that were taken in '79, the tanker wars that I don't think really in the end benefited either side, and of course the shoot down of the Iranian airliner and the tragic loss of life that we saw in 1988. U.S. and Iranian forces are in close contact. We have forces in Iraq up against the Iranian border. We have forces in Afghanistan, and we both have forces at sea in the Gulf. And you know as well as I, tensions are always just beneath the surface in any or all of those locations. I'll share with you, it's kind of a human story, I think, of a communication that was intercepted by the folks at Dubai International Airport. It took place between an Iranian air defense controller and a U.S. aircraft. And it went something like this. Unidentified aircraft, this is Iranian air defense. You are in Iranian airspace. The pilot came back, that's a negative. I'm an American aircraft and I'm orbiting over Iraqi airspace. The Iranian came back and said, you are violating Iranian airspace. Either you leave immediately or we will send up aircraft and shoot you down. The pilot came back after a second and said, Iranian air defense, this is the United States Marine Corps F-18 fighter. Send them up. I'll wait. That's not a story intended to talk to the bravado of our pilots, although they're a pretty roguish lot. I tell you the story because that's the hair trigger that we're on in the region. And so it gives us concern. I have a high level of confidence in our U.S. chain of command. I mean, the Secretary of Defense can be notified of events happening in the Gulf in a matter of minutes. I have less confidence in how tightly wound the Iranian chain of command is, and in fact, I even believe there are some rogue elements there that could act on their own. And I think an example of that is what we saw a couple of years back now in March of 2007 with the capture of the British Royal Marines and British sailors. What would have happened had perhaps those people been Americans? What would have happened had they attempted to resist, thinking that help was on the way? They were badly outgunned and outnumbered. What would be the result of 15 American bodies clearly floating in international waters? You need only contemplate, I think, the possibilities. More recently, and General Shelton mentioned it, we are seeing a definite uptick in the numbers and therefore the effects of Iranian systems working their way into Iraq. As we commence our drawdown and start to withdraw in earnest, we are seeing many more units and elements of activity taking place in an effort, I think, to try to give the impression that they're causing us to leave. In fact, of course, the drawdown has been long known and well planned. In June, we had 15 soldiers killed in Iraq. That is the highest count of casualties since 2008. 9 of those come as a result of rocket attacks onto our main bases, and ladies and gentlemen, those are Iranian rockets. The other weapon system, of course, is the explosively formed penetrator. The Iraqis have had a tough time manufacturing their own, but the Iranian are of good quality, and we're seeing them in Iraq. Next door to Iran, on the other border with Afghanistan, just in the last week or so, our Marine commanders are reporting a definite, again, surge in sniper activity. And where we saw that happen in Iraq some years ago, those quality snipers were Iranians and Syrians. And so there is intrigue taking place here that, again, as has been mentioned, Secretary Panetta, in some of his first actions, is condemning heartily. And so, again, there is the potential that these miscalculations could have relatively severe impact in a relatively short order. The Middle East is the Middle East, and things happen sometimes in an obtuse fashion, and they happen quickly. And so we simply need to be, I think, concerned about that. A second area, I believe, is energy manipulation. In large measure, I believe, through our own doing, our great country has found itself largely dependent on fossil fuels. And in that, there is strategic vulnerability. And in that, there is a recession that we're experiencing that in some ways limits our ability to do certain things. The 2% reduction in Libyan oil, given their problems there, is not lost on the members of OPEC and particularly on the Iranian membership. In fact, it's interesting today that the discussion that's taking place in OPEC, on the part of the Iranians, they say, let's keep prices high because it will have adverse impact in certain other countries in the world. The Saudis are saying that, well, let's keep prices just below the tolerance level. And that way there will be no desire to develop alternative fuel means. And oil will continue to be king. Now, that is all lose-lose for the United States. But the fact is that we are at the end of that string, and that string is being jerked. And there is concern that should there be retaliation for sanctions that are being laid, should there be a reaction to potentially another Israeli Hezbollah breakout or dust-up, should the Saudi oil fields be attacked again? They have been attacked once. We believe it was al-Qaeda. But should there be any disruption of the significant oil supply, not only for us, but as importantly for the rest of the world, you can see the impact that it would have on our economy, which represents a vital national interest in my mind. And we could be compelled to act. The oil market is not a free market. It is controlled by nations that don't always want to agree with the things that we do. And in that regard, we are certainly vulnerable. There was a secret cable that has been declassified, sent in 2008 from our embassy in Saudi Arabia. I'll read it to you. The continuing vulnerability of Saudi Arabia's strategic oil and gas production facilities represents an Achilles heel for U.S. strategic interest in the kingdom and throughout the Gulf region, not to mention U.S. economic security in general. The cable concluded, in the estimation of the MOI, the Ministry of the Interior, these facilities face a serious threat from both al-Qaeda and Iran. Perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, the most troubling potential for conflict is the persistent course that Iran has taken on the development of nuclear power. They would call it nuclear power. I think we would call it nuclear weaponry. Clearly, there is no need in Iran for nuclear power to provide energy. They have the second largest amount of natural resource in the whole world. There are generations upon generations of power capability in Iran, cheap power. And so the supposed need for nuclear power is questionable at best. The rest of the region is watching. Saudi Arabia will not stand by. Questionably, Turkey will not stand by without some thought towards proliferation, perhaps even Iraq in the long term. Iraq will one day be a rich country. And depending upon how situations evolve there, you could see much more extensive use of nuclear kinds of capabilities in the region. From a U.S. perspective, President-elect Obama has said that it is unacceptable for Iran to have nuclear weapons. Now, he has not uttered those words as our president, but I think it's fair to say that every aspect of our national policy towards the development of those weapons points towards that thought process. And so again, I offer the fact that our nations, in very short order, could be on collision course. From a strategic perspective, there are not a lot of good options here. The United States is unlikely to gain an international mandate for action. America will be seen potentially as attacking yet another Middle East nation. And nationalism within Iran, with an outside attacker, would coalesce. And some of the same people that are your families and that would be the opposition would in fact, I think, be compelled to support their nation if attacked by another. From an operational perspective, air attack against the facilities would be difficult. I think would have limited success and would possibly delay but not destroy the capability. Where there is the will and the means, the capability will continue to be pursued. And certainly, any idea of regime change, if you will, a march on Tehran like there was a march on Baghdad, would be long and difficult. And I would refer you back to the recent words of Secretary Gates that we would have to have our heads examined to undertake such an objective as thinly spread as we are today, and again, as difficult as that would likely be. There is a wild card in all of this, and it is the Israelis. The Israelis believe that Iranian development of nuclear weapons represents to them an existential threat. I believe it's generally believed, I think, that action has been taken through computer efforts to slow the effort, but it has not been stopped. The Israelis have a history of preemptive action where they feel threatened, both in striking an Iraqi nuclear reactor and most recently a Syrian facility that seemed to have the same intent. Once again, they would face the same targeting issues as any other nation, and they might be able to delay, but they would never stop. That said, any attack by Israel immediately polarizes the rest of the Middle East. And I think whether or not we were involved, we would be drawn in. We would be seen as supporting that effort. They would be flying American airplanes, dropping American bombs, and maybe or maybe not coming across American-controlled airspace. So we, although it might or might not be in our nation's best interest, would nevertheless be cast into the same lot as the Israelis. And again, huge economic impact, and I think an evaporation of whatever goodwill we have been able to develop as we encourage representative governments throughout the region. So no good options there if our nations continue along these converging courses. In summary, what are the probabilities for these types of confrontations? Well, I would put miscalculation on a scale of 10, probably at a 5. I would put energy manipulation probably about a 4. But folks, I put the problems and the issues that we could have vis-a-vis this nuclear development on a scale of 10 at an 8. I think within the next couple of years, unless something happens differently from how we are responding today, Iran, as you know it, could be very different if indeed there is conflict with our great nation. So again, I endorse the third option, and I hope I inject in you a bit of a sense of urgency that sooner is better in terms of whatever influences can be manifested to try to make a difference. Let me, if I can, as a final comment, just speak for a moment about the MEK and Camp Arashoff and my own observations and experiences. I guess I'm the only member of the panel that may have had physical responsibilities for their security. And I'll go back with you and tell you that in 2004, when my expeditionary force went back into Iraq, we went into the western province and had responsibility for securing a couple of elements of MEK that were first around Fallujah and then relocated down southwest of a place we call Takata. I asked my superior, what kind of bag of worms are you handing me here? Our job is tough enough. To have a, quote, terrorist group in our midst is something that I was not prepared to take aboard. But as I dispatched some of my commanders to sit down and talk with these folks, as I visited myself, these people are not terrorists. They're no more terrorists than the people here on the panel. There was an obvious contradiction. On the one hand, we knew they had been listed by our State Department, and I have tremendous confidence in our State Department. On the other hand, we were told, and the mission remained for 5 years in Iraq, to provide them security. It made no sense. If they're terrorists, we ought to be arresting them and investigating them and making sure that they receive their just dues. We asked those people to disarm. They're the only people in Iraq who are disarmed. Okay? A decision was made early on by Ambassador Bremer that it was okay for an Iraqi to have his AK in the closet. And yet these people complied willingly and have done what we asked them to do. Now, it seems to me the press of events, and other members of the panel have played them out, I think, very nicely, are such today that we have got to reconsider our national posture towards the people at Camp Arashoff and the MEK in general. I read, as I did my homework, that the French have come back and said our initial investigation was flawed. There is no basis for the entirety of the claim. Our good friends in Europe, as has been enunciated again, the UK and the EU are encouraging us to alter our policy. And I've got to tell you, what happened recently should be a national outrage. And unfortunately, I don't see it. Let me drop back. When I train Marine lieutenants as a young captain, our guidance to them is if you are working as an advisor to a foreign unit and there is about to be a violation of human rights, there's about to be an atrocity, try to stop it. Okay? If you can't stop it, then you walk away from it because you do not want to be a part of it. But you immediately report it, and then you do something about it. Now, if you elevate that simple tactical lesson to nations, then there's something missing here. Okay? The incident has occurred, and now there is a responsibility on the part of our nation, I believe, to demand investigation and find out who are the culpable parties. I honestly think that needs to be the next step in this affair because, as has been emphasized, we are the United States of America. We have values. We stand for something. And I think that there is a moral imperative here to make this situation right. And I think from a moral perspective, and arguably even from a legal perspective, we have lawyers on the panel, I should let them talk about that, we bear a responsibility. As long as there are troops in Iraq, U.S. troops in Iraq, we bear a responsibility for what has happened and what should happen in the future. Let me just finish by saying, though, ladies and gentlemen, after that is done, and that's got to be your 25-meter target, your 100-meter target has to be influencing that regime in some way, any way you can, to avoid this collision course that we see today. The last person that wants to go to war is a general, and I'll swear to you today that we simply don't need to see this happen. But inevitably it will, unless something is done. Thank you all for the